Hi, this is J.R. Fibonacci, and I wanted to do a quick video on the dominoil effect and the collapse of the baby boom bubble. I'll explain what I mean by that, and I'll breeze through some data really fast, a lot of which you will know. The dominoil effect is the six dominoes that you can see there. Oil prices, gas prices, expenses, surplus cash, investing and lending, and then the prices of real estate, stocks, and so forth. Um, the detail of that is as oil prices go, gasoline prices go. And in the particular case of oil prices rising, as they have from 1999 until recently, um, back over a 1,200% increase from 1999 to 2008. We have then seen an increase in gasoline prices. And when I say gasoline prices, I mean throughout much of the world, not just the United States, and I also mean in inflation-adjusted terms. So gas prices had actually um, been declining through most of the 20th century on the whole, at least in the United States, with improvements in technology and more supply. Basically, just lots and lots more oil available and thus more gasoline available. So oil prices in the last 10 or 11 years have been rising quite a bit. So gas prices have risen, uh, especially in Europe and North America. And that's meant increasing expenses, not just for individual people and commuters and travelers, but also for businesses. So with that increase in expenses, there's been less cash available. There's been less profits for many businesses. Um, and also less money available for many households as they've faced, in Europe, the $6 gallons of gas, even $8 or $10 gallons of gas. So that's really cut into their budgets for households and for businesses. So when the expenses have gone up so much for with gas prices, that's meant less cash available for spending, less surplus cash for spending on anything besides fuel, gasoline, energy. So that's meant less investing and less lending because they haven't had cash to lend or to invest. So they've done less, they being individuals and businesses. So with less investing and less lending, prices of stocks have gone down. Again, throughout much of the world, prices of real estate in much of the world have gone down. Since there's been less lending and less buying overall, then there's been more selling and hence prices go down. That is what I mean by the collapse of the baby boom bubbles, is the bubbles of economic activity, lending and borrowing, investing in things like stocks, but also the bubble of cheap agriculture, cheap fuel, uh, cheap agricultural prices. How do I want to say that? Inexpensive agriculture, which has put a lot of farmers out of business, small farmers. Um, so the concentration of agriculture into a few really big companies is what I mean by that, the agriculture bubble. So that bubble is shifting. There's also been a huge increase in human population, due largely to the advantages to the abundance of fossil fuel over the last few hundred years: coal, natural gas, oil, and so on. So those are the bubbles, the baby boom being like the biggest increase in population in a short amount of time. That's the increase in population right after what's known as World War II. So around 1945 and 1946, you had a lot of soldiers returning home to Europe and to North America. And so those returning soldiers started families or continued families and had more children than they had been having in the years prior when they were out fighting wars and were not with their families. their lives. So that's the basic thing. I want to give a little background and a little future reference as to what's coming, and that'll be it for this presentation. So the background is really quite simple. It goes to the point of how did so many people or several people know that oil prices were going to be rising and gas prices as well, such as myself. In 2004, I wrote an article titled "The Real U.S. Deficit of Oil." In 2005, worth its weight in oil. Back in the late 70s, a fellow named Jimmy Carter was president of the United States and was on national TV, and he basically pointed to the same principles and the same possibilities and probabilities that I'm about to mention now, that a country that depends on importing fuel will eventually face some economic challenges depending on the extent of that dependency. In the U.S. as well as the UK and other nations, you can see varying amount of dependency. In the UK, Ireland, and Greece, certain countries are really struggling right now. In the U.S., people think that it's very bad who are in the U.S., but that's probably because they haven't been to Ireland and Greece and Rhodesia and Ethiopia. So they think, oh, I'm only making, a CEO might think I'm only making $6 billion or $6 million this month. It's a struggle, right? Or I'm only making $70,000 this year. It's a struggle. Or I'm only making $7,000 this year. For some people, $7,000 a year is rich, right? But for a lot of Americans, that's a decrease in what they've been used to. So back to the basic principle of how so many people knew that oil prices would peak. The basic thing was that we saw that demand was rising much faster than supply. That's it, really. But I did 6 little dominoes there. The first 4 have the green letters for the word begins, and the red letters in the last 2 for peaks. First, there was exploration of oil that began in the 19th century. Discovery began right after the exploration began. Discovery began, and then extraction and refinement of oil began, and then consumption of oil began and took on a mass scale, and was very, very popular in the U.S. with the popularizing of automobiles and roadways. We saw the same kind of thing in Europe and other places. But then exploration peaked, and then discovery peaked, and then extraction and refinement peaked, and then the indication is that consumption will also peak, by which I mean eventually decline, like maybe all the way to zero. Discovery, I think it was the 1950s, when, maybe 1940s, I'm not certain, when discovery peaked in the United States in terms of domestic discovery of oil reserves, and then production, by which I mean extraction and refinement, that peaked around 1970 in the U.S. And consumption continued, though, to rise because there was all this oil available from other places like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Venezuela, Mexico, Canada, and also Russia, the North Sea. There were lots of other oil deposits throughout the world besides Texas and Oklahoma and Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico. So that's the basic idea, that now that production of oil worldwide seems to have peaked as of 2006, that consumption in the very near future, or perhaps already, has peaked, although peak soon. And subsequent to that, supply of oil will drop faster and faster and faster. Demand may continue to rise very quickly, but supply will not likely to rise. And if it does rise, it's not likely that it's going to rise as quickly as it did in the 1930s or 1960s. So we're facing 1,200% increases in oil prices in only 8 or 9 years. We've only had a few 100%, and not even just a little bit over 100% of increases in oil prices in the last decade. I'm sorry, in gasoline prices in the last decade. Oil has gone up, over 1,000%. Gasoline prices have only gone up maybe 100%, a little more than that so far. And what we're facing then is a series of repercussions. As I said, oil prices go up, gas prices go up, the expenses of households and businesses go up, their surplus cash, their net profits go down, their investing and lending go down, so the prices of real estate stocks go, at least in those countries that are most dependent on fossil fuels, like UK, European Union, and North America also. Of course, we had in the late 80s the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then the peaking of Japan, and then the last 20 years in Japan have been generally a decline of Japan's economic influence worldwide. So now the final thing where I get even more specific as to some consequences here, and kind of overview the whole thing. Another 6 dominoes. Number one, oil and gas prices got cheaper and cheaper. That's number one. So that happened from, let's say, 1890 or 1870 or whatever till 1999, basically. We had more oil being produced. You had better and better ways of getting it out. You had this really awesome new industry called computers that were not available in 1890 or 1880. So in 1990 or 1995, you find some oil, and boy, you can get it fast. You've got, all this technology and all this civil engineering, experience, machinery, manufacturing, just ready to roll and get that oil out. So it was getting cheaper and cheaper on inflation-adjusted terms. And people were spending less and less as a percentage of their overall expenses on fuel. So what someone might have spent on fuel in 1890 might have been a lot more as a percentage of their overall spending than in 1990. So oil and gas prices got cheaper and cheaper overall, decade after decade, throughout basically the industrialized world. As those oil and gas prices got cheaper and cheaper, certain economies boomed, certain industries boomed, of course. Oklahoma and Texas boomed. You had the Houston Oilers, the Dallas TV show with its oil industry executives. You had the rise of the U.S. and USSR to superpower status. Those were the two top producers of oil in the 20th century. And then also you had Saudi Arabia and some of the other countries coming to prominence after the U.S. and USSR had. So certain economies, certain industries, certain people had tremendous prosperity. Subsequent to that first domino, oil and gas prices get cheaper and cheaper. So then that third domino, once the demand is rising way faster than supply, and there's no technological innovations to balance that out, then oil and gas prices can spike. So that's what we saw starting in 1999. Oil prices went up about 1,200% about 9 years, from $11 a barrel to $148 a barrel or so. That's the third domino. Now, when those prices spiked, again, you had all that thing of expenses go up and costs go up, and investing and lending decrease, so real estate and stock prices collapse. That's the fourth domino in this sequence. And then the fifth domino is, given that real estate and stocks are collapsing in certain industries or contracting, certain nations are facing tremendous hardship, the tax revenues of the governments are way down, all of that. Well, many face bankruptcy and foreclosure or worse. In the case of the Soviet Union, the actual central government collapsed. So that's domino 5. You may know something about what's happened in the last few years in regard to rates of bankruptcy and foreclosure in places like the US, UK, EU, Japan, Number 6. As many face bankruptcy and foreclosure, prudent investors benefit from the unprecedented opportunity. There's people who are really just trying to dump whatever they've got, typically for cash or whatever it takes to afford fuel and sustain their lives, and to avoid bankruptcy, to avoid foreclosure. So people who are properly positioned can benefit tremendously and at least avoid the big drop. In other words, by selling out of real estate and stocks early, and also by investing in ways that produce profits during a shift of this sort, this widespread prosperity spread across the middle classes in North America and Europe and so forth are going to be, all that wealth is going to be concentrated into a relatively few number of people and organizations. So prudent investors have available to them immense opportunity, unprecedented opportunity. And along with that, yes, there's all sorts of possibilities that go along with the opportunities for people who are having huge increases in their material prosperity. They have the capacity to influence governments, influence human social order, and basically lead the future of humanity. So that's what's available by accurate perception, noticing things early, adjusting, adapting quickly, prudently. And that is my presentation on the dominoil effect and the collapse of the baby boom bubbles. By collapse, I also mean shrinking or quick shrinking. Also the term deflation or deflating. That's all the same. So the deflation in Japan the last couple of decades, deflation that started in Europe and is also happening in the US. That's what I'm saying is extremely likely to continue. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I make this presentation not just to inform you, but also to invite you to share this with other people who might be interested in this content. And if you are interested in assistance in adjusting to what's emerging, not just in the choice of investments, but the way you organize your finances relative to tax liability and court liability and a variety of other things that I'm not in detail right now. If you're interested in adapting prudently and availing yourself of the unprecedented opportunity developing now, then I invite you to contact me. If you don't know how to contact me, and you're seeing this on YouTube, on my YouTube account, it's 144JR144. You can just go to my YouTube channel and send me a message instructing you how to reach you by phone or by email. Thank you for your interest.